The knock came just after dusk, low and slow, as if made by someone uncertain he deserved to be heard. Mirabel stared at the warped wooden door of her one-room shack, her heart hammering beneath the patched shawl she hadn't taken off in 3 winters. No one ever came this far, not to a woman like her, not up the steep ravine where even sunlight hesitated to visit. She glanced around her crumbling walls, past the one-legged table and the soot-choked stove, and whispered to herself, "Lord, please let it be someone kind." When she opened the door, she had to step back, not from fear, but from sheer scale. The man before her looked carved from mountain stone, broad-shouldered, and hunched slightly so he wouldn't scrape the lintel. His beard was thick, but his eyes, they weren't hard like most men's. They looked like someone had just told him a secret too big to hold. "Ma'am," he rumbled, hat in hand. "Storm's coming. Was wondering if I might rest here just till it passes." Mirabel blinked. Her home had never been anything more than a slant-roofed afterthought, a leftover from her husband's cruel ambitions and final departure. She swallowed and stepped aside. "You're bigger than my house," she said, voice barely above the rain starting to spit outside. That's when the mountain man did something no one expected. He didn't laugh or flex or try to squeeze through with pride. He just stood there a second longer, then fell to his knees, eyes filling fast. "Ain't no one ever let me in without question," he whispered, still on the stoop, tears running into the dirt. "Not once." Mirabel froze. What kind of man wept at the door of a shack? What kind of man knelt when others barged in? She didn't know what to do, so she reached out and touched his shoulder just lightly. "Storm's not the only thing that needs shelter," she said, surprising herself. He nodded but didn't move. She realized he wasn't waiting for her to let him in. He was waiting to be sure it wouldn't hurt her to say yes. So, she did. "Come in, mister," she said softly. "I've got soup if you don't mind it thin, and fire if you don't mind it quiet." As he ducked inside, carefully folding his frame to avoid the sagging beams, something strange happened. The room didn't feel smaller. It felt warmer. He took the stool without breaking it, hands folded like a boy at church. She stirred the pot and tried not to stare. "Name's Alder," he said after a long silence. "Been living where there ain't much kindness left." Mirabel met his eyes. "Then maybe you're due for some." But as the wind howled and the door creaked behind him, she noticed something else. His boots were nearly torn through, and a long scrape marred the length of his left arm. She didn't ask about it yet, because something told her there was more under the surface of this giant than hunger and tears. And she wondered, if a man that big had nowhere else to go, what had the world done to him before he knocked? Mirabel didn't sleep that night. Not really. Not with a man like Alder beneath her roof. Not with the sound of the storm pressing down on the shingles like fists. And certainly not with the questions crawling through her chest. He lay curled near the stove, arms folded beneath his head, the firelight catching the wet glint in his beard where tears hadn't dried. She hadn't asked why he cried. She hadn't dared, but every so often she looked at him from her cot in the corner and wondered what it took to bring a man of that size to his knees at a woman's door. Her eyes kept landing on the ragged scrape along his arm. He hadn't mentioned it, but when he dozed off, he winced every time he turned that side toward the fire. She knew better than to poke around in a man's pain uninvited. But something about him made her feel like if she didn't ask soon, she might miss something important, something sacred. At dawn, the wind slowed, and the gray light filtered through her tattered curtain. Alder stirred and sat up, blinking like he wasn't sure he'd dreamed the whole night. "Didn't mean to take your only fire," he said. "Didn't mean to take your peace." Mirabel poured the last of the broth into a tin cup and handed it to him without meeting his eyes. "You didn't take anything," she murmured. "You made it feel like someone was watching the place for once." He looked at her like that, hurt worse than kindness. Then, quietly, he rolled up his sleeve to reveal the full wound. It wasn't just a scrape. It was a deep, jagged gash, half-healed but infected, surrounded by bruises that looked more like boot marks than brush cuts. Mirabel stiffened. "Who did that?" she asked, sharper than she meant to. Alder glanced at the door. "Was working near Dead Man's Hollow. Bunch of fellas caught me passing through. Thought I looked like someone else. Decided to teach me something anyway." She swallowed. "You didn't fight back." He gave a slow nod. "Not until they started talking about a girl, some settler's daughter gone missing. Thought maybe I was the one who took her. I ain't touched no one. But they didn't care." His voice cracked like firewood. "They just needed someone to blame. Mirabel's hands trembled as she knelt beside him with a clean cloth and the last of her boiled pine salve. "Well, you found the only soul in these woods who's ever been blamed for breathing too loud," she said, dabbing at the wound. "So maybe you'll stay a bit longer. Heal up proper." He flinched but didn't pull away. "You ain't afraid of me." She looked him dead in the eyes. "I'm afraid of ghosts. You ain't one." A long silence passed between them, stitched with the soft snap of fire and the echo of rain easing off the roof. Then quietly, he said, "What happened to your man?" She hesitated. "Mine left me in this shack when I got sick. Said the hills were better company." "He ain't wrong." Alder nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's a mercy he's gone." Mirabel didn't reply. She just pressed the cloth gently against his wound and whispered, "Funny how both our scars come from folks who should have known better." In that moment, something shifted. He wasn't a mountain anymore. He was a mirror. And she wasn't ashamed of her tiny house. Not with him in it. In that morning, the sun broke through for the first time in days, painting gold across the mossy trees, and Alder stepped outside barefoot, his boots still soaked from the storm. Mirabel watched him from the crooked porch, arms crossed, unsure if she should feel embarrassed or strangely proud that he was seeing her world without apology. He took a long breath, turned toward her, and said something that made her jaw go slack. "Let me fix it." She blinked. "Fix what?" He pointed at the roof, at the leaning porch rail, at the patch of dirt where the chicken coop used to be. "All of it. The house, the yard, the whole place." Mirabel let out a single dry laugh. "You want to fix the world's ugliest shack? You serious?" Alder nodded once, calm and steady. "I don't got much else to offer, but I can work, and I'd like to repay you for the fire and the bread, and for not looking at me like I'm a thing to fear." She didn't answer right away. Her throat tightened. No man had offered her anything in years. Not without a price, not without a look in his eye that made her skin crawl. But Alder's offer had no hunger in it. Just stillness. Just dignity. "You don't owe me a thing," she said softly. "You bled on my floor. That's payment enough." He gave a small smile. "Let me stay a week. Just a week. I'll patch your roof, rehang that door, maybe get that chimney drawing again. Then I'll go. No trouble to you." Something about his tone unsettled her. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was so gentle it felt like truth. "You're not like other men," she muttered. "I ain't trying to be." That was when she noticed the bundle tied to his back, a rolled canvas, some tools, and a small sack of nails. "You were always planning to fix someone's house?" she asked. "No," he replied. "I was planning to build one. Just didn't know where it would be." Mirabel's voice was thin when she said, "This ain't much of a place to settle." Alder looked around. "It's got a soul. That's more than I had yesterday." She opened her mouth, then shut it. "Because what do you say to a man who calls your shame sacred?" He didn't ask again. He just started. By noon, he'd swept the porch, pulled out the broken floorboard near the stove, and was whittling a new brace for the leg of her table. She brought him cool water and watched the muscles move beneath his shirt as he worked. "You do this for a living?" she asked. "Used to. Before I got chased out of town for helping the wrong girl." She paused. "What do you mean?" He stood and looked her square in the face. "Her pa didn't like that I was brown." The silence stretched. Then Mirabel said without hesitation, "You can stay longer than a week." He smiled and for the first time it looked like something in him loosened. But before she could step back inside, he added something that stopped her mid-step. "Your house ain't ugly, Mirabel. It's small, but it's kind. And when you told me I was bigger than it, I didn't cry because you were right. I cried because no one's ever let me feel safe in something smaller than me before." That's when she knew. He wasn't just building shelter. He was trying to build belonging. The next day, Mirabel watched from the kitchen window as Alder hauled a heavy stack of rotted timber from the back wall of the cabin. He worked slow but deliberate, as if each plank were a memory he had to handle gently. Sweat rolled down his neck, soaking the frayed collar of his shirt, but his face was calm, focused. Mirabel stirred the pot of beans on the stove, her thoughts spiraling like wood smoke. She didn't know why she was still letting him stay. Maybe it was pity, maybe it was the way her shoulders relaxed when he was near, as if her bones remembered something she didn't. Just after noon, she stepped out with a tin cup of water and found him kneeling in the weeds, examining a pile of stone that used to be her garden wall. "You planning to rebuild that?" she asked. "No," he said. "This wall didn't fall. Someone knocked it down." Mirabel frowned. "The storm did it." Alder shook his head. "Storm? Don't knock over dry laid stone unless the ground goes with it. And your soil's firm. This wall was torn out piece by piece. She didn't answer because she remembered now her brother. Drunk, angry, hurling stone after stone into the night because the garden reminded him of their mother. It wasn't the wind, she whispered. Alder looked up. Then why are you rebuilding everything but this? She turned her back to him, but her voice carried. Because this wall was meant to keep things out, and I already know what that's like. Silence passed between them like a long shadow. Then Alder stood and said something so quiet she almost missed it. Some walls were made for protecting, not hiding. She turned. You think I've been hiding? I think you're still living inside what other people left behind. That hit her like a hammer. Not in anger, but in recognition. He wasn't trying to insult her. He was naming what she couldn't. That night, as the stars pressed low and thick against the sky, she found him sitting at the edge of the garden stones, cleaning the grime from each one with a scrap of cloth. You don't have to do that, she said. They're just rocks. He didn't look up. You ever think maybe your mama laid these? Maybe your hands touched everyone. Mirabel swallowed hard. She used to hum when she planted. Said the earth listened better to music than to words. Alder smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time the earth heard her voice again. The next morning, she found something she hadn't seen in years. A row of stones, not as a wall, but as a path leading from her porch to the garden, as if he were guiding her back to something lost. She stepped barefoot onto the first stone, then another. The morning dew stung her toes, but she didn't stop. She walked the whole path, slow and steady, until she stood in the overgrown weeds that once held tomatoes, corn, and herbs. She no longer remembered the names of Alder didn't say a word. He just watched from the shade of the barn, his expression unreadable. I think I'd like to plant again, she said aloud, though mostly to herself. Then we'll plant, he said as if there'd never been any question. But even as he spoke, his eyes flicked towards the forest as if watching for something or someone. And that was when she realized for all the work he did, all the peace he brought, there was still a story Alder hadn't told. And it was following him like a shadow. It was near sundown when Mirabel saw the silhouette approaching. Lanky, crooked posture, a rifle slung carelessly across his back. Alder was splitting firewood behind the barn, but the moment he heard her gasp, he dropped the axe mid-swing and stepped around to the front like he already knew who it was. The man stopped at the edge of the property just past the broken fence and smiled with the kind of mouth that never told the truth. Well, I'll be damned, he said. Didn't expect to find you holed up with a woman. Alder didn't move, didn't speak. Only the tightness in his jaw betrayed that he recognized him. Friend of yours? Mirabel asked cautiously. The man chuckled. We're blood kind of. Used to run together until he decided he'd grown a conscience. Alder's voice was low, firm. Turn around, Cass. You ain't welcome here. Cass clicked his tongue. So this is the mighty Alder now playing house with some backwoods widow. Thought you were chasing something bigger. Mirabel stepped between them, heart pounding. You've got no business here. Move on. Cass laughed again. She's got grit. I'll give her that. He eyed the house. Bet it's warmer inside than that cave you used to call a home. But I ain't here for trouble. Just came to collect. Alder stepped forward. You got no claim on me. Cass's expression darkened. That right, you forget who took the fall for you in Tall Pines. You walked. I got 7 years in a box. 7 years thinking what you owed me. Mirabel felt the ground shift beneath her. You, what is he talking about, Alder? Cass smirked. Didn't tell her, did you? How you were the one who put the sheriff's son in the dirt and I kept quiet. Said it was me. He tried to slit a Lakota girl's throat in the creek bed, Alder said quietly. She was 12. You call that murder? Cass's eyes narrowed. I call it a noose waiting for the wrong man. The silence burned hotter than any fire. Mirabel stared at Alder, trying to reconcile the man who rebuilt her path with the one Cass described. Is it true? She whispered. Alder didn't flinch. Every word, but I won't apologize for saving her. Cass pulled out a flask, took a swig, and tossed it into the grass. You owe me, brother, and I don't want money. I want your horse. The black one. Strong legs, clean hooves. She'll fetch a good price in Elkridge. Alder's eyes darkened. You touch her and I'll bury you under her hoofprints. That the old Alder I hear. Cass sneered. Maybe he ain't dead after all. With that, he turned and sauntered back down the road, whistling a hymn that sounded like it came from hell itself. When he disappeared over the rise, Mirabel looked at Alder. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to bring his shadow into your light, he said. You're all that's good around here. She swallowed. But if he comes back, he will, Alder said. And next time he won't be asking. The piece they'd been building cracked like thin ice beneath a hoof. And somewhere behind Alder's stillness, Mirabelle saw something new in his eyes. Not fear, but a promise of war if it came to that. Alder didn't sleep that night. He stood by the door like an old statue, rifle across his chest, listening to every windshift and distant coyote howl. Mirabelle watched him from the table where she sat with her hands folded tight, candlelight turning her knuckles white. The cottage felt different now, less like a sanctuary, more like a target. He's not done with us, she said softly. Alder nodded. He never is. Cass only knows how to burn what others build. Outside, the moon had dropped low enough to cast eerie shadows from the pines, and the wind dragged the past back with every breath. When morning broke, Alder saddled his mare, but didn't ride. Instead, he led her down to the stone path Mirabelle had built. Each rock a labor of pain turned into purpose. He knelt there, ran his calloused fingers over the stones, and whispered something in a tongue she didn't understand. "What are you saying?" she asked. "Lot," he said, "a blessing my mother taught me for strength, for clarity when your enemy wears a familiar face." She knelt beside him. This place, it was meant to be quiet, safe. We were healing here. Alder met her eyes. That's why he hates it. A hawk screeched above them, circling once before soaring west toward Elkridge. Alder stood, squinting into the morning light. Castle trade lies and stir the coals in town. We need to be ready. Ready for what? She asked, though she already feared the answer. Whatever storm he brings back. That afternoon, Alder retrieved something from the woodshed, a wrapped bundle hidden beneath firewood. When he unwrapped it inside, Mirabelle's breath caught. "That's not a tool," she said. "No," he replied, "it's memory wrapped in iron. A long rifle etched with native symbols and burn marks across its length." She reached for it hesitantly. "You were a warrior once." He didn't answer. "Just check the chamber and oil the bolt. Still him if someone threatens what I love." That night they double-latched every door and lit every lantern. Not for comfort, but to see shadows before they became men. Mirabelle slept with the shawl Alder had given her weeks ago. Coarse wool with a mountain-stitched hem. While he stood outside under the stars, speaking to them in a language lost to most. Around midnight, a sound cracked through the air like an old bone breaking, a wagon wheel, then another. 2 horses, 3 voices. Close. Alder stepped into the clearing with the rifle raised. A figure approached with a torch. Cass flanked by 2 lean men with pistols and grins too wide. "Didn't want it to come to this," Cass called out. "But you're a hard man to reason with." "Turn around," Alder warned. "You won't like how this ends." Cass smirked. "I never liked how it started." One of the men raised his pistol. Mirabelle, standing behind the cracked door, felt her breath catch. She had no weapon, only her will, and the knowledge that this home had already survived one war. But this time the war was at her door, and the man who once wept at her kindness now stood like granite, willing to fall if it meant she would rise. The torch light flickered, the trees waited, and under Mirabelle's stone path, the blood of old wounds warmed once more. The first shot rang out before the threat had a name. Cass's man to the left had cocked his pistol, but Alder was faster. His long rifle cracked like thunder across the clearing, and the man dropped without a sound, his hat spiraling into the pine needles. The second man raised his gun, but his hands trembled. The mountain did that to men, shook the false bravado right out of them. Cass didn't flinch. He stepped forward, torch raised, voice calm. "You just killed my brother." Alder didn't blink. He died with a gun in his hand. "You're walking with fire into a house that healed you once." "She lied to me," Cass growled. "She made me feel small. And then you came, some half-breed with a sad look and arms like oak trunks." Mirabelle stepped out, eyes wide, face pale, but her voice held. "Cass, go home. This place was never yours. You left it behind when you broke my ribs and blamed the floor." Cass turned his gaze to her. "I gave you everything. Food, a roof, my name, and then you took the rest," she said. "My peace, my voice, my hope." Alder moved between them slowly. "You want to hit something, Cass? Hit me." Cass chuckled gladly, but as he stepped forward, something shifted. The second man, a boy, really barely 20, lowered his gun. "He said you were hiding cattle," the boy muttered. "Said you stole his land." Alder looked at him. "Do I look like a thief?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir. You look like someone who finally stopped running." Cass's face twisted. Traitor. The boy backed away. I didn't sign up to shoot a woman for leaving a man like you. Cass snapped. He turned, aimed his pistol. Not at Alder, but at the boy's back. That was his mistake. The second shot came from Mirabelle. She had taken Alder's sidearm from the kitchen shelf, her hand steady. The bullet tore through Cass's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He dropped his weapon, fell to his knees. You, he hissed. You'd shoot me. No, she said. I'd shoot the man who turned you into this. Alder picked up Cass's pistol, emptied the chamber, and tossed it deep into the woods. Cass groaned, clutching his wound. You think they'll let you live out here in peace? You think your mountain will protect you forever? No, Alder said, but I'll protect her until it doesn't. The boy helped Cass to his feet. Let's go, he said, voice low. This place ain't ours. Cass didn't argue. He stumbled back toward the wagon, leaving behind blood, pride, and the last thread of control he ever held over Mirabelle. When the sound of hooves finally faded, Alder turned to her. You okay? She nodded slowly. That shot, I didn't even think. I just did it. That's what courage looks like. She stared at the gun, then handed it back to him. I hate it. That's what makes you strong. Together, they walked the stone path back to the door, side by side, silent. The wind had changed. Not gentler, not harsher, just honest. For the first time in years, there was no echo behind their steps, no ghost in the walls, only breath, heartbeat, and a truth big enough to share. Pain had left its mark, but it hadn't stayed, and neither had the man who tried to own her silence. The fire inside her small stone hearth hadn't burned this cleanly in years. Alder fed it patiently with bark and splinters, his movements slow, deliberate, like he didn't want to disturb the room's quiet breath. Mirabelle sat across from him on the worn rug, knees to her chest, eyes not on the flames, but on the quilt draped over her shoulders, the one she had stitched years ago for herself and Cass, never imagining it would end up wrapped around a man who had protected her with silence, not fists. Why'd you cry? She asked suddenly. Alder didn't look up. When I said you were bigger than my house. He leaned back, running one hand along the grain of the floorboards. Because no one's ever said something that kind, most folks look at me and see a threat or a joke. Too tall, too broad, too wild. But you looked at me and saw a place to fit. She blinked, unsure whether to smile or cry. I was embarrassed. So was I, he said. But not by your house. By the way, you still opened it. He glanced at the doorway. That man left cracks in your ribs and your soul, and still you let a stranger in. You weren't a stranger, she whispered. You were the first man who didn't ask me to explain myself. Alder stood, ducking slightly to avoid the beam overhead. When I was younger, I tried to live in towns, tried to fit my legs under desks made for smaller men, tried to date women who thought my silence meant stupidity. He crouched beside her. Then I came out here, hoping if I got big enough, the ache would get smaller, but it didn't. She touched the scar on his knuckle. What healed it? You, I think, he said, eyes steady. Your porch. Your apology, your truth. She smiled, but it faded quickly. What happens now? You just stay here. Not unless you want me to. She shook her head. Not no, but not yes, either. I've been someone's project before. Someone's shame to fix. I can't be that again. Alder's face softened. Then let me be something else. Let me carry wood, fix the fence, sit beside you without filling the room with my needs. You'd really just be here. I've been alone so long, he said. I forgot what it feels like to be useful without taking. They both sat in the warmth for a while. The quilt shifted from her shoulders to both their backs. The fire cracked. A tin cup steamed on the table. Outside, the trees no longer loomed. They stood present, patient. She finally whispered, tomorrow, I'll go into town. Sell my beats. Tell them you're here. Let them think what they will. They'll talk, Alder said. Let them, she replied. For once, I'll let the world shrink instead of me. A long silence passed, not tense, not loaded, just full. And in that fullness, something unspoken bloomed. Not love, not yet, but the kind of stillness that makes love possible. No more apologies, no more proving, just two people too bruised to run, too tired to pretend, and finally warm enough to stay seated beside the same fire. Mirabelle found it by accident the next morning, tucked beneath a half-eaten biscuit and a folded cloth. The old woven basket she'd used for beet deliveries hadn't held a secret in years. But there it was, an envelope creased with time. The ink smudged, but unmistakably hers. Her hands trembled as she opened it. She hadn't written this, but the handwriting was hers, her own from a time she barely remembered, when she still had hope that letters meant something. To whoever finds this, it began. If I've made it to tomorrow, burn this. But if you're reading this and I'm gone, tell Cass I tried. Her breath caught. Cass. Her daughter's name hadn't passed her lips in 2 years. Not since the neighbors whispered she was better off without her. Not since she'd stopped sending letters that were never answered. I left because I was scared. The letter continued. Not of him. Of becoming what he said I was. Small, pathetic, worthless. If Cass ever asks, tell her I stayed alive, that I kept the door unlocked, that I never stopped carving her name into the bedpost each night just to feel like I still mattered. Tears stained the paper as Mirabelle dropped it to the floor. Alder, returning from chopping wood, found her sitting in the sunbeam that had crept through the patched roof. He crouched silently, waiting. She didn't speak, just handed him the letter. He read it in full silence, then folded it carefully. When did you write that? Years ago, she said, voice. I must have forgotten it was there. Why'd you keep it? Because I didn't believe it, she whispered. Not until now. Believe what? He asked. That I wasn't what he said I was. Alder sat beside her, their knees touching. What changed? You, she admitted, not because you saved me, because you didn't try to. He leaned his head against the beam. I was scared last night, he said. Not of you, of wanting this too badly, of saying something wrong and making you disappear. I almost did, she said. Disappeared, he nodded. I know. Outside the wind carried the sound of distant hooves. A wagon rattled on the horizon. Mirabelle didn't look up. I think she's alive, she said. Cass, I felt it in my bones for years, but I thought maybe she'd be better if I didn't come looking. And now, Alder asked, now I want her to know I'm still here. He looked at the basket. Then write a new letter. This time let her know she's not coming back to the same woman. She smiled. She's coming back to a patched roof, a washed floor, and a mountain of a man who cries when someone sees his heart. And a mother who finally sees her own, he said. She stood slowly, bones creaking, but chest lighter. She lit a candle, pulled out a clean sheet, and began to write. This one didn't begin with sorrow. It began with a welcome. Dear Cass, she wrote. If you ever come back, there'll be a chair by the fire, a quilt with your name sewn into it, and a man here who understands how much silence can mean. She paused, looked at Alder, and added, and I've finally forgiven myself for the things I didn't say. I hope someday you will too. The storm came without warning. A rolling wall of darkness that swallowed the sun and dropped the sky onto Mirabelle's homestead like a curse. Years ago, it would have meant disaster. The roof had always been a patchwork of sorrow and guesswork, a metaphor for everything she couldn't hold together. But that night, as thunder cracked and the wind howled like ghosts pounding on her door, something strange happened. Nothing leaked. Not a single drop landed on the kitchen floor. The chimney stayed firm. The walls didn't rattle. She sat in her wooden chair by the fire, blanket over her knees, and just listened. Alder sat on the floor beside her, his shoulder pressed against her leg, carving something quietly with a blade and a pine block. It had become their ritual now. These quiet moments, the space between confessions, where the pain stopped echoing and started dissolving. Mirabelle could hardly believe how a silence like this once terrified her. Now it made her feel whole. You ever been in a house during a storm that didn't leak? She asked, half laughing. Alder looked up at the ceiling where raindrops traced invisible lines but never broke through. Not till now. It's strange, she said. The things you never dare to expect. It's not the roof, he said. It's you. What do you mean? It held because you wanted it to. Because you needed it to. Because for once you believed you deserved shelter. She swallowed hard. The truth of it hit deeper than any insult her ex-husband ever muttered. I used to think the leaks were punishment, she whispered. That no matter how hard I worked, something would always fail, that I wasn't allowed to have peace. Alder stood slowly and walked to the door. He pushed it open. Outside, the storm raged, but his face softened. You're not who you were, Mirabelle. She stayed seated, unsure if she could stand under the weight of that sentence. You've changed, he added. You don't walk like you're apologizing anymore. That's because you don't look at me like I'm broken. That's because you're not. The wind whistled through the trees. Mirabelle stood finally and walked to him. She took his hand. There's something I haven't told you, she said. Back when I was with him, he made me believe no one would ever stay in this house willingly. That if anyone came by, it had only be to take something. I didn't come to take anything, Alder said. I know. Then why are you crying? He asked, voice gentle. She didn't realize the tears had started because this storm is the first one I've ever watched from inside without flinching. They stood like that for a long time, hand in hand, framed by a doorway that used to welcome no one. Outside, lightning split the sky, revealing their reflections in the window. Two figures weathered by different tragedies, stitched together by something no one else would understand. Do you think she'll come? Mirabelle asked. Cass Alder nodded. I think she'll feel the shift even from far away. I want her to know that this house isn't cursed anymore. Then keep the door open, he said. Let the rain clean the steps. Let the wind carry your name. Mirabelle turned back inside, grabbed the fire poker, and lifted it to the beam above the hearth. She carved one word into the wood. Home. I'm not afraid of the leaks anymore, she said. Because this place was never broken. I was just waiting for someone who saw more than rotten ruin. And now, Alder asked. Now I see a roof that held, a fire that stayed lit, and a man who didn't run when he heard the storm coming. It was early morning when Mirabelle saw her. No more than a silhouette at first, moving slowly along the muddy ridge where the path twisted like a scar through the trees. The mist hadn't lifted yet, and the sky was a soft gray, like someone had scraped the stars off with a blunt knife. Mirabelle stood on the porch, holding her breath. She knew it was Cass. She could feel it in her bones, in the quiet ache behind her ribs. Alder came up behind her silently, his hand settling on the small of her back. She's limping, he said, squinting. Left leg, old injury. She fell off the porch when she was 10, Mirabelle whispered. I told her the nails were sticking up, but she wouldn't listen. She looked strong. She was always stronger than me. They waited in silence as the figure approached, the shape resolving with each slow step. A young woman with a knapsack, her hair tangled, dress soaked at the hem, boots caked in red dirt. But her eyes, when they met Mirabelle's, had that same defiant light she'd had as a child. Mama, Cass said, her voice low and rusty from travel. It's not leaking, Mirabelle said, her voice cracking, stepping off the porch. The roof, it's holding. Cass blinked, confused, then looked up. You fixed it, number heated. She gestured back toward Alder, who offered a respectful nod. But I patched it. I kept it dry because I knew you might come. Cass dropped her bag and just stood there staring. I didn't think you'd want to see me. Why? Because I didn't believe in this place. I didn't believe in you. Mirabelle stepped closer, took her daughter's hands. You were right not to. It wasn't a home then. Not for either of us. And now it's a roof that doesn't leak. A floor that doesn't give out. A kitchen with a fire that doesn't die. Cass looked over her shoulder at the door. Is that all? No, Mirabelle said, tears filling her eyes. There's a man who cries when I talk about my shame and a porch that's waiting for your footsteps. Cass swallowed hard. I have nowhere else to go. Then it's a good thing you were always meant to come back. They embraced a long, trembling thing that spanned years of silence and regret. Alder stepped back, giving them space, his eyes damp but proud. Cass looked up at him over her mother's shoulder. Are you a guest? He said. A roof fixer, a wood cutter, and sometimes a man who forgets how to speak when the world shows him grace. You're the one who made her brave. She already was. I just stayed long enough to prove her roof wasn't the only thing that could hold. They stepped onto the porch together, the three of them. Inside, the fire was warm, and the house didn't creak the way it used to. It was no longer afraid of people, of memories, of storms. It was just a house, finally allowed to be what it was always meant to be, a home with room for second chances. Cass touched the carving on the beam, home, and smiled. You finally wrote it down. It took me a while to believe it, Mirabelle said. But now, Cass asked. Now, Mirabelle said, looking at Alder. It's the only word that fits. And in that quiet moment, as the mist gave way to morning light, the three of them stood together, not as strangers, not as broken things, but as something whole, born not of perfection, but of love earned the long way round. The wind that once howled through the eaves now whispered, as if careful not to disturb the hush that had settled inside the little house. Alder sat at the table carving a small figurine out of pine. His hands moved with the slow grace of someone who knew how to stay, who had learned the art of quiet presence. Mirabelle stood near the stove, stirring a pot of soup that smelled like roots and rosemary, while Cass swept the floor with rhythmic strokes, her eyes occasionally drifting to the window. You know, she said softly. I thought this place would collapse if I ever stepped back inside. Mirabel smiled without turning. It nearly did, but someone braced it just long enough for me to remember what it meant to stand. Alder looked up, locking eyes with Cass. And now it feels like it's been waiting. It has, Mirabel whispered. Just like I did. A knock came on the door, gentle, unsure. Cass opened it, revealing a neighbor boy no older than 10, holding a sack of kindling. Mama said you might need firewood, he said. Said you might have guests again now that the roof don't leak. Cass crouched to his height, took the sack. Thank you. It's warm now, but it's always good to be ready. The boy grinned. Mama said you was dead. I felt like it, she said. But I'm not. Not anymore. He nodded solemnly and turned to go, then paused. Is he the mountain man folks whisper about? Cass looked at Alder, who only smiled. He's a friend, she said. He fixes what others leave broken. The door shut gently behind him, and the silence that returned was softer now, like a blanket rather than a void. Cass moved toward the beam near the fireplace where Mirabel had once carved the word home. Slowly, she pulled a knife from her pocket, an old one dulled at the edges. May I? She asked. Always. Beneath home, she scratched the letters one by one. H-E-L-D. Alder crossed the room without a word, took her hand, and traced the letters with his fingers. A house doesn't become a home when the roof is fixed, he said. It becomes one when someone's willing to stay under it, even when it's raining. And when someone chooses to return, Mirabel added. They sat together by the fire that night, the three of them passing warm bread and soup between them. There were no grand speeches, no promises spoken aloud, but the silence was thick with meaning. When Alder rose to fetch another log for the fire, Cass caught his sleeve. You never told me why you cried that night. He paused. Because it wasn't your house that was small. It was the world that had taught you to apologize for it. And when you opened the door anyway, I didn't know how to carry that kind of grace. So, it crushed me in the best way. She let go of his sleeve. It didn't crush me, it built me. He smiled and kissed the top of her head like a father might, then turned to the hearth. As the flames crackled, Mirabel whispered, Do you still think you're bigger than my house? Cass looked around. The table, the warmth, the carved beam, the man who had stayed, and the mother who had waited. No, she said, but I think this house is finally big enough for all of me. And outside, in the quiet of the hills, the wind passed gently over the roof, no longer searching for cracks or places to weep through. The house held, because she did, because they all did. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If a broken house held your whole story, would you have let someone in? Tell us in the comments.